There is another young man. He's an Arab, he's Iraqi. His name is Hussain Adnan of IRAQ. He was born in Fallujah in Iraq in 1983. So that makes him 34 years of age now. His story is remarkable. And again, we're not talking about normal individuals who are trained, taught, subhanAllah. This Hussain Adnan of IRAQ, born in Fallujah, when he was born, his parents were very concerned at birth because he wouldn't move in childhood, in his infancy, after birth. He wouldn't move like a normal child. No sound, no movement. Of course, he would be breathing, eyes open, alert, so they knew he was conscious and alert. But hardly any movement and no utterance, no sound. In their concern, they took him to various doctors and medical specialists in Iraq at the time. Eventually, after many tests, etc., the family was told that he suffers from a physical loss of cells in his brain. So there was physical damage to part of his brain. The doctors also told the family that there is no hope of recovery. Because he suffers from physical damage to his brain cells, there is no hope of recovery. And listen to this, Allahu Akbar. The doctors actually told the family that if he survives to adulthood, and if he is able in his childhood or even in adulthood to recognize his own name, that will be a medical miracle. They said, if he grows up to be able to hear, he will hear, but if he grows up to be able to recognize his own name, that will be a medical miracle. These were the words they used. It would be a medical miracle if he grew up to be able to recognize his own name. The father never gave up hope. And being a pious individual, this is his uncle, meaning the boy's uncle, the father's brother's testimony, and other family members' testimony as well, that the father continued to make dua. And this is the uncle's testimony, family members' testimony. They say that one day his father saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in his dream. And since his son's condition was always on his mind, on his tongue, the father related that in the dream, I knew I was in a dream. I knew I was dreaming. And I knew that the Prophet ﷺ was in front of me. So what I wished to do is I wanted to use that opportunity to speak of my son. So I told the Prophet ﷺ that I've gone to extremes about my son, my extreme concern, and please pray for him, or whatever he must have said. And then he says that I knew that I was in my dream, and I feared that the dream would end without me being able to bring my son. So in my dream, I went to fetch my son, and I brought him before Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, quickly in the hope that the dream would not end. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam took the son in the dream and rubbed his chest and blew over him and said a few words. The father, when he saw this dream, he was away from the family, somewhere else, at a distance in another city. So he contacted the family and asked them how his son was. And they said, it's fine, still the same. And gradually, though, the family saw an improvement in his condition. When he was approximately 3 to 4 years old, the family then attempted to teach him the alphabet. So he was a very difficult child, and he would rip up any books or magazines that he was given. So even learning material, alphabets, pictures, magazines, books, he would actually rip up these books. The only book that he would not rip was the Quran. It was extremely difficult as a child. The only book he would not rip up was the Quran. And he would hold the Quran and place it on his chest. And he would actually fall asleep like that with the Quran on his chest. As a child, 3 to 4 years old. Eventually the family members, they realized that his condition was improving. And they realized that the medical prognosis did prove to be miraculous. And he still suffered brain damage. And he was unable to do many of the things. Even now, he's in his mid-30s. He has learning difficulties. He's unable to do many things. In fact, he's 34 years old now, as I've just mentioned. Even now, this man, Allahu Akbar, he cannot count from 1 to 5, let alone from 1 to 10. He can't count from 1 to 5. He's an Arab, so if someone asks him, count 1 to 10, and I'll explain this later, it's remarkable. So, when he was young, the family decided to teach him the Arabic alphabet. Again, just how to join up the words. So he managed to begin recognizing the Arabic letters and joining the words and reading and pronouncing them. One day, when he was approximately 5 years of age, his father took him to the masjid. Now, when he was young, he would have obviously flicked through the Quran pages. So he would rip up the other books, but when he came to the Quran, he'd hold it close to his chest, he'd cherish it. He'd also flip through the pages rapidly, just flipping through the pages, quite randomly as well. And by that time, he had learned to recognize the alphabet and also the written words. His father took him to the masjid at the age of 5, approximately. The Imam was giving a speech. And whilst he was giving a speech, the Imam mentioned a verse of the Quran. And then he said, this verse is in Surah Al Imran. So this young lad, Hussain, spoke up and said, no, it's in Surah Al-Baqarah. So the Imam checked and he realized his mistake and he acknowledged it. Now everyone was shocked. The father was shocked, let alone anyone else. The father was shocked. So the father questioned his son, how did you know that this verse is in Surah Al Imran? Sorry, it's in Surah Al-Baqarah and not in Surah Al Imran. And the son then, at the age of approximately 5, told the father, I've memorized the Quran. The father never knew. He's memorized the Quran. Now, one could say, this is a fable. Well, you can actually go onto YouTube and you can check this for yourself. He's been invited all over the Middle East to various stations, TV stations and shows. And he sits there. And even now when he is introduced, he's introduced as someone who has learning difficulties. And he sits there. And you have a panel at times questioning him about the Quran. Nothing else, just the Quran. And Allahu Akbar. You see, the other children I was talking about who are able to recall verses with their corresponding names and of the surahs and the numbers of the verses, they actually undergo training. And they are normal, intelligent, healthy children. So they train to do this. So it's remarkable, but you wouldn't exactly call it miraculous. It's very remarkable. But this young man, he's not taught, he's not trained, he has permanent physical damage to his brain, he has extreme learning difficulties. Even now in his mid-30s, he can't do anything himself. He needs the support of his family. So they do everything for him. except when it comes to the Quran. He can't do anything else, but when it comes to the Quran, he sits there like a computer. He does, with his disabilities and his mental disabilities, he is able to exhibit feats of the Quran that the greatest of scholars cannot do. And no exaggeration. So he has one chosen copy of the Quran which he's probably been reading all his life. You know that other young man, Ahmadullah, that I spoke about, the one who's a non-Arab, the one who till today doesn't speak and learned the Qa'idah in 3 years and the Quran memorized it in 1.5. That young man, till today, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the understanding and the tawfiq. May He enable us to appreciate the gifts He has given us. Allah has given us our mental faculties. Allah has given us a tongue, a fluent tongue. Allah has given us time and opportunity. This young man can't speak, doesn't speak at the age of 20. Yet this Ahmadullah, who's a non-Arab, yet every single day he, without fail, spends 14 out of the 24 hours of the Quran, or of the day, reciting Quran. 14 every single day. And this Hussain Adnan al-Abdali al-Falluji, his permanent brain damage, suffers from mental disabilities, can't do anything else for himself. He completes one Quran every day in 5 hours. In 5 hours, every single day. And he's a rapid reader. And because of his learning difficulties, he still can't pronounce the words correctly. So he's an Arab, he pronounces the words, but his words aren't as fluent. In normal speech as well as his recitation, they're not as fluent or as clear as a normal individual. But the feats which he displays are remarkable. He sits there, the examiners question him. And remember, this is without training, without practice, just completely natural to him. They'll mention a verse of the Quran from anywhere out of the over 6,200 verses. He'll mention a single verse. Instantly, he'll mention the name of the surah and the verse number. And he has permanent damage to his cells, and he has learning difficulties. Similarly, they'll mention a verse number. So, Surah Al-A'raf, verse number 8. And instantly he'll recite the whole verse and continue reciting until you stop him. That's remarkable. Even more remarkable, since he has that copy, his own copy of the Quran. No markings in it, just a normal copy of the Quran. One of the editions. So what he does is, they'll tell him, I'm opening page 431. Page 431, what's the first word at the page? And he'll mention the word and start reciting. Straight away. Page 290, read, and he'll start reciting from the top of the page. He'll just flick the pages randomly. Page 112, he'll start reciting from the top. Then he'll say, okay, Hussain, pause. I'm opening page 360. Now I'm going back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, read. And he starts reading from the top of the page, 7 pages behind the numbered page. 20 pages ahead, 11 pages behind. Remarkable. Then they'll examine him in the following way. And you can see and watch all of this for yourself. They'll say to him, page number 311. He'll start reciting the verse from the beginning and say, no, pause. We don't want the first word. We want the last word of the first verse on the page. Then we want you to give us the last word of each subsequent verse without reciting the verse. SubhanAllah. It's like he's looking at the page in front of him and he starts mentioning يَعْلَمُونَ تَعْلَمُونَ muttaqun. And all he does is mention the last word of each verse. And he'll continue doing it until you tell him to stop. Again, remarkable. Even more remarkable. They'll pick up, choose a page 518. The last verse at the bottom of the page, she'll start reciting and say, no, pause. We want the last word of the last verse on the page. And then we want you to go backwards. So we want you to tell us the last word of each verse, but backwards. So he starts mentioning the examiner, and he's got the camera there. He's jumping backwards from each verse and choosing only the last word. And sometimes even faster than he's moving, Hussain is reading the last word of each verse backwards in reverse order. Not reciting, but mentioning. And then in between, suddenly the examiner said to him, Hussain, count from 1 to 10. And wallahi, you can see the look on his face. He stares at the examiner, stumped. Totally stumped. Dumbfounded. And then the examiner repeats, Hussain, count from 1 to 10. And all he says in reply after a few seconds is, haram, sidi haram. Meaning haram, don't ask me that question. So the examiner says, count from 1 to 5. He looks at him again and says, haram. And then the examiner reveals to everyone that he actually cannot count from 1 to 5, let alone from 1 to 10. Till today, he's 34, he can't count from 1 to 5, let alone 1 to 10. He does not know the sequence of numbers from 1, 2, 3, 4. He cannot follow that sequence logically. Till today, he just cannot do it. Yet, when it comes to the Quran, Allahu Akbar. Now, he's on stage in the studio, TV studio, in one clip. You've got some family members, you've got the examiners, you've got members of the panel, and he's sitting there, and all he does is just stares, either at the audience or sometimes stares down, doesn't say any more than what you ask him. And all that people ask him is about the Quran. And then, whilst he's staring down or looking up ahead, the examiner says to the family, often you can't ask him questions directly. About the Quran, yes. But about various other things, you normally have to go through the family. So they speak to the family member and say, ask him what he's doing now. He's just sitting there silently. So they ask him, and he says, I'm reciting the Quran. And then a short while later, they ask him again, what's he doing? So they ask him, I'm reciting the Quran. They said, how much has he recited? So whilst he was sitting in the studio, imagine if we were sitting in the studio, brushing ourselves and looking at the camera, the audience, am I looking good? Subhanallah. He's sitting there, they said, how much Quran has he recited? While sitting in the studio, whilst the panelists were talking, discussing, and the cameras were following him, and he's sitting there silently in between the questions, he completed so many pages of the Quran, just reading. And that's all he does, recites Quran. This Ahmadullah, the non-Arab speaker, who till today does not speak a word of his own language, his father says he doesn't even ask for water or tea or food, his father's words. Nothing. He spends 14 hours every day reciting the Quran, learned the booklets of the Qa'idah in 3 years, and that was his greatest achievement. He failed everything else in school till the age of 12. And with extreme devotion from one of his teachers, who dedicated himself to the task, the most he achieved by the age of 15 was no other alphabet, no language, no reading, writing skills, not a word spoken. But the most he ever achieved was he managed to learn the booklet of the Qa'idah in 3 years. And that's just the Arabic alphabet, individually and conjoined. And then all of a sudden, that same young lad from the age of 15, in 1.5 years, he memorizes the entire Quran. And here you have Hussain Adnan al-Abdali al-Falluji, with a physical mental disability, extreme learning difficulties, unable to do anything else. And one thing he did say, though, that they asked him that, why don't you get married? He's not married. and why don't you get married? In one of the interviews he said, Musiba.